With infinite complaisance, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome Jennifer on with me. She has a lot of experiences, and she's here to share some of those today. Jennifer, welcome on the show.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you. I think I told you I have a little bit of a head cold, so if I sound a little funny, that's the reason, and I'm going to stick to it. So
those are the worst. They hang on forever.
Ever.
So I know that you actually initially reached out really because of essentially one specific subject and experience, but you do have others. So I told you in the beginning before we officially started that I'm going to let you take the reins and you get to talk, of course, about whatever of your experiences you feel like sharing with me, and wherever you want to start, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, we've kind of talked about, I live a very, very, very suburban life. I am very active with Boy Scouts. I'm a local Boy Scout leader. I am active with my son's high school JROTC unit and do a lot of volunteering. I run a business with my husband. I don't get to live the life of talking about my experiences often. So, but I always kind of feel like I have one foot in the paranormal world where everybody else around me seems firmly planted in the life of, the living. And I have experiences since I was a little itty bitty thing with ghosts. That's sort of the area of my life that I am the most interested in and have the most experience with. And I'm one of those that I watch all the ghost hunting shows, and I've gone ghost hunting just because it's almost like second nature to me. It's like my one freaky side that my friends know about. And then a couple of years ago, I got introduced to podcasts. I was not like a big fan of podcasts, and I kind of let my more paranormal self, I explore that more obviously on the internet and like the Facebook groups I'm a part of. So all of a sudden I started to get a little interested in cryptids and joined like a cryptid group in North Carolina because we purchased a retirement home up in North Carolina right on the Blue Ridge Parkway. So I'm always now going, well, wouldn't that be fun if I actually had a Bigfoot encounter, which I haven't. I don't think I ever will. But somebody put a shout out for a story. They wanted a story about an alien encounter. And I have an alien encounter, and I have two very small ones and then one relatively big one. And that's just an area of my life I never really explored. I know I had this experience, and I'll tell you about that. But it wasn't anything that affected me to the point that I did research on it or that it consumed my life. I don't watch any of the alien encounter shows or anything like that. But then once this person asked for the story and I gave them my story, I thought, I've never heard other people who've had the same experience that I did. So I thought, I would throw it out there to just sort of see if there was somebody else who had this similar experience. So I put the story out there, and I didn't get anything back. So I'm wondering if I'm alone in this experience, but I figure I'll start there because it's the one that I have the most interest in knowing if others have had something similar, and then we'll kind of take it from there. But when I was growing up, I came from a broken home, and I was one of the rare ones that I lived with my dad for most of that time. But there was a short period of time where I lived with my mom alone with my brother when I was about 8 years old. And this would be in Northern Virginia in the Fairfax, Virginia area, which is about 20 minutes outside of DC. And just as like a little side story, so my parents, I found out later after this experience of mine that my parents had themselves had an alien experience when they were newlyweds with their neighbors next door. So I kind of found myself going, well, that's a bit interesting that there are a couple of alien experiences coming from within the same family. So that just kind of got me thinking. But where my story is that this was in the fall of probably 1979, 1980, and I was living in an apartment complex in Northern Virginia, and I was at a friend's house. And the way the apartment complex was set up was it was several apartment buildings in the woods, and sort of in the middle of the woods was a clearing that had a pool and a playground. So if you wanted to get to the pool or the playground, you had to kind of go through your particular patch of the woods to get there. And then if you wanted to go to a friend's house on the opposite end of the apartment complex, you'd have to go through your woods, go through the clearing that had the playground and the pool, and then go through another set of woods to get to the building of your friend. So it was dusk, and my mom's boyfriend had come to get me for dinner. So we passed by the pool, and we were going through the playground area, and he was walking just a few feet ahead of me, and he kind of entered the woods, and I don't know if I heard something behind me, but something made me turn around, and standing maybe 10 feet behind me was like an honest to God alien. It was, I was 8, so I was, kid sized, but this being seemed particularly tall, like a little bit taller than an adult, not significantly taller, but taller than an adult. They were, naked. I didn't see any, gender identifying aspects to the body, but it was clearly skin, not cloth, that they were made of. And it was looking right at me, and I want to say he. I don't think back on this memory that often, but when I do, I get like a male energy from this being, and it seemed very kind. I was not scared. And I do have to kind of preface that I think I said that I came from a broken home, and this was right at the thick of things where my parents were divorcing and my mom was dealing with substance abuse, and so my life was just weird enough that I could encounter an alien and not make anything of it. And I'd had enough paranormal experiences in my life that, that this didn't seem too far out of left field for me. But I kind of felt like we had this little experience where I looked at him and he looked at me, and he actually brought his left hand up, and he had, what you would consider the stereotypical super long fingers that were slightly bulbous at the end. And he gave me like the be quiet motion. He put one finger up to his lips, and it indicated to me that I was to not make noise. And I understood that, and I just sort of looked at him, and he looked at me, and I just turned around and followed my mom's boyfriend back into our apartment, and then I just went on with my life. And again, like I said, the ghostly aspect of my life was something that I always felt interested in and studied and kind of delved into when I got to be older. This I just kept it, and it wasn't a recovered memory. I've known about this since it happened. So it wasn't anything like, I was in therapy or anything that I realized that I had had this experience. It's just something that's been with me. I just never talked about it. And I do know with experience, I don't talk about the woo-woo part of life very much. I'm not in a position where, we're talking about Mothman in a Boy Scout meeting. But when you do talk about this kind of stuff, people are very open to ghost stories. They look at you like you have a third head when you want to say that you've actually had an alien encounter. So that was just something that I just never really talked about. And the one thing, which is what I mentioned to you in the email, that I would be curious to know if anybody else has had this experience, is that the head was very different. It's not what, I've done some research, and it's not your traditional gray with that triangular head and the big wide eyes. This one had like a hammerhead, and eyes on the opposite side. And when I Google that, which I don't do often, but when I Google hammerhead aliens, usually something from Star Wars or comes up, and that it's not quite what I saw. So anyway, that was the alien experience. And it was, like I said, it wasn't fright. It was something that was, in a weird way, I kind of felt like love from this thing. I almost feel like we startled upon each other accidentally. It was, I think, like a kind of a happenstance that we crossed paths, and he made me feel very safe. And I never, it was anything that caused me nightmares or anything like that. I did years later, like I said, my parents had some experience where, when they were newlyweds in that same Northern Virginia area, they had a situation where they had seen some kind of flying saucer or UFO, I don't know what they call them now, come close to the ground and shine like a light in their window, and they and their neighbors went outside and they saw something very clearly in the sky. And then I had my experience, and then I had another very subtle experience. I live in Florida now, and we were kind of having a block party outside, and at the end of our street, I live in a small town surrounded by suburbia. So it's a neighborhood of Tampa on the coast. And at the end of our block is two large water retention areas and then a huge soccer field complex. So at the end of our block, which is just a couple of houses down from my house, it actually kind of gets dark and rural, and there's an indented water retention area. So my son was a toddler at the time, and it was around 4th of July. It may have been 4th of July. But it was around then. We were all outside kind of celebrating, and I had walked with my son to the end of the block, and something caught my eye, and I looked out to the water retention area, and it was nighttime at this point, and I actually saw a shimmer, and it, for lack of, I feel like I'm going to sound like, some nerdy teenage boy, but just to kind of use basic language to describe it, it looked like, there was a flying saucer or UFO that was glitching, so it kind of looked like mercurial, but it was coming in and out. Sometimes it was not, I couldn't see it, and then it would sort of shimmer, and then I'd see it kind of flash a little bit, and then finally I saw it just absolutely, take off and shoot right up into the sky. So I went to my husband and told him that, and like, I've talked with you about, my husband is a very straight-laced kind of guy, so I'll tell him about my experiences and he'll acknowledge them. He knows me enough to know that I don't lie about these things, but he's also not that interested. So he said okay, and that was it. And then we went back on with our experiences. But in the back of my mind, I have that idea that the stuff that I have listened to or paid attention to with aliens is that it's not a one and done kind of a thing, that they do follow up or they do study. But I know I've not been abducted. Like I know I've not been off this planet, and I know that I haven't been probed or anything like that. So I don't really know what these experiences mean, or if it is something where they're paying attention to me. But when I wake up in the middle of the night, and every once in a while I'll go peer out my back window and just sort of, because I face the water retention area, and I'm like, is there anybody out there? But there never seems to be.
So I
Anyway,
know that movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I think, came out late 70s,
70s.
77 or 78. Were you
Yeah.
aware of the term, aliens or alien or UFOs at that time when you saw this thing?
Yeah, I hadn't seen that movie yet, and again, I was 8, and I'm at my computer, so just out of fun, I'm going to Google Close Encounters. But I was aware, but it wasn't a part of my life. I was so like in my face with what was going on with my parents that was more of where my attention was. But when I saw this thing, it didn't I knew what it was. I knew that it wasn't human. And you were right, you were spot on. Close Encounters is 1977.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I
um
love that movie.
Look at you go. Yeah, it's a good. I've only seen it once, but I do remember it being very good. I
So,
remember.
absolutely. This means something. This means I say that and nobody usually gets that.
It
Not
gets
on
the
when I'm
reference.
doing this show, most people do get it, but just in daily life I'm like, "No, they didn't pick that one up, but that's okay." So,
Yeah, that's
this
okay.
this hammerhead being, you said it could look at you. So it wasn't like this classic hammerhead shark, right? Like where the eyes are at the end of those extensions
It
of its
it
skin.
was, but it could like rotate them
Oh.
forward.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? So it was clear. The encounter was. It feels like it was like 3 hours, but maybe it was a minute. You know what I mean? It wasn't a very long experience. So, but from what I can recall, it's more of like a feeling that we were both registering each other, and it communicated to me to be quiet.
But what I like, and I'm happy for you that you didn't feel any fear in this experience, but of all the things it could have done, I wasn't expecting you to say that it took its hand and finger and did the
I
motion. I mean,
know,
for
like,
what? Why? You weren't screaming, or maybe it was
well,
worried you would. I don't know.
I think it
With
was more that. But now we know that that's the the international universal sign for keeping your kids quiet. But I think it was one of those, if I really like look at it, if I really kind of put myself back in the moment, I feel like I interrupted it going somewhere, and it wasn't expecting me to see it. And if I had flipped out, it would have interrupted what it was doing, is kind of the feeling that I got. So it was almost like, and I'm now maybe layering emotion onto it as an adult, but it was almost like an imploring, like, just be quiet. And I'm not, like I said, I felt love from it as opposed to danger. And it may be, I don't know. This is where I'm moving out on you, but maybe that's its mechanism, so that, it kind of soothes you so that you don't freak out, and it can go on and do its diabolical agenda, but that's not necessarily the feeling that I got from it.
I mean, obviously you're sensitive. You have a lot of experiences, which we'll cover at least some of those today. They're not necessarily having anything to do, sometimes one with the other. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I
Right.
do wonder if your mom's boyfriend turned around, would he have even seen that thing?
Yeah, I've kind of thought about that too, only because the thing seemed shocked that I registered it. It was kind of like it's like almost comical, where I feel like it was, oh, look at you, like, there you are, you can see me. And I sort of was feeling the same thing of turning around, because I don't even know what made me turn around. And he was I was we were walking perpendicular to each other. I was walking towards one direction, like northwest or north south, and he was walking east west, so we kind of crossed each other's path, and he seemed startled that I could see him. So it's quite possible that my mom's boyfriend wouldn't have seen him, but I don't know.
Did you ever, or any time from then until now, gone into, and of course it takes a person willing to create a report for there to be a report, but have you ever gone back
Right.
and looked to see around that area around that time, even a couple years, give or take, if there was any UFO activity?
I kind of, sort of. Like I said, I've had very little interest in it. It's Washington, it's the suburbs of Washington, D.C. in the late 70s, right? And this is just me personally. This is not anything that I have like, files of stuff on, but I go conspiracy theory on that, if there's going to be any alien encounters. And that's when all those movies were popular. That's when, you look at the unsolved mysteries and stuff like that. It's all the late 70s with all that, the kind of cryptid and paranormal stuff happening. And it would be something that would occur in the suburbs of DC. And if you've got aliens who are observing kind of the the capital of the planet to a certain extent, they're going to hide out in the woods, and there's plenty of woods in Northern Virginia, especially at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where my mind goes. So like I said, I've not spent a lot of time just because it doesn't interest me that much. But, if you do Google the alien encounters, Northern Virginia, Fairfax, Virginia, which is where this happened, actually pops up often enough.
Yeah, that is true. And that's the bummer of it, is that so many people, I mean, we've even talked about it in our own families. Sometimes we're the we're the black sheep. We're the ones that like the weird stuff. So even in our own families, you
Right.
kind of feel like, well, I'm just gonna. This is my interest, and that's okay. So many people have that same feeling. They're like, well, yeah, I have this experience, but no one wants to listen to it. So why should I ever even share it? So it takes a whole lot, I think, for someone to actually not only take the time and the effort to seek out a website or any kind of an organization that would listen to them, because
Right.
most people in our daily lives, they're supportive enough, but they don't really want to sit down and have deep conversations about this stuff. So I get it, and that's the problem. Now, what we
Yeah.
do want out of this though is for people to listen to that, of course, very interesting aspect of the encounter, which is that its head was shaped like a hammerhead. So if
Right.
anybody out there has ever themselves, of course, even better, but if you've ever come across anything like that on an old blog or another podcast, send it along to me so that I can let Jennifer know, right? Because that's the
Right.
aspect of this that, of course, stands out. It's extremely unique.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like I that's the only reason that I actually have a lot of interest in talking about this, just because you always hear about the grays, the triangular heads and stuff. And I cannot be the only person on planet Earth, and I'm sure your podcast has a wide range of people listening to it, but I cannot be the only one that have encountered these beings. So I'm curious. I'd love to hear from others that have had something similar, hopefully.
Yes, please reach out, Shannon at intothefrayradio.com. Or, if you're a more social media person, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then I can pass it along to Jennifer. Well, Jennifer, what
Yeah.
else would you like to cover today? It's completely up to you. You have a lot of very interesting experiences.
Well, I've got, again, I love to talk about this stuff, but at the same time, it's a little bizarre because, you get a little nervous of people not judging you because I don't know these people, but, I've lived, as I said, I've lived a life of just sort of having one foot in the paranormal world, right? And I can remember things really early. Like I have memories of being an infant in my mom's arms and being nighttime and having her sing nighttime stuff to me and all that kind of stuff. But my first real memories, like when I really first started to come to consciousness, would be, between the ages of 1 and 2. And I remember very distinctly every night I would be laying in my crib, and my crib was facing the door to the hallway, and there was a light, and I could always hear my parents down in the living room and listening to TV while, the kids were falling asleep, type of a thing. And there would always be up in the corner, just beyond where the shadow from the hallway would come in. It was like a separate shadow in the kind of the top corner of the room above the door, and it was like a face. And it was a profile of him, and I got that it was a man. And that was just something every night I went to bed being cognizant of the man in my room. And that's one of those things that you think as you grow older, you just think everybody has that experience, or everybody has the guy in the upper corner of their bedroom. And then you come to realize that they don't. But that was sort of the beginning of me realizing that I kind of saw things or were aware of things that others weren't. My brother is 5 years older than me, and we grew up in many of the same houses together, and he doesn't have these stories. But my mother and my father definitely didn't. He was a very earthy, grounded man. But my mother was definitely of the same ilk. She had experiences, and when we got a little bit older, she and I got to talking about them. And I felt vindicated and validated that she was kind of similar in that way of seeing things that weren't necessarily there. And a lot of my issues, not issues, but I want to call it a problem, is because I've always would love to be like a psychic medium. And I did have which I'll tell another time, but I did have one moment where I blew wide open, and it was a certain set of circumstances. And I did have a psychic medium situation happen where I was channeling some woman's father and started telling her all kinds of things, and her eyes got really big, and she started to cry. She's like, I can't believe you just said all that. But that's only happened to me like 1.5 times. But my stuff comes more from like, I have a feeling, as opposed to I concretely see things, or I concretely have these experiences. But, growing up with my mom, there's a whole there's a whole like kind of almost separate story where my mom was concerned, where she was the quintessential kind of 70s hip hugger, Ouija board using, listening to heart, kind of pseudo witch, white witch in the 70s. And her sister was actively participating in black witchcraft. And there's a story there. But again, I want to kind of get to the more interesting stories of things that I have experienced personally. But it was always something I was aware of, like my mom doing Ouija boards and shadows in the corner, and my aunt being slightly off, and knowing, to things to avoid in the family. But we moved when my parents eventually split up, and I was sort of disconnected from my mom's energy. We moved into a house again in Northern Virginia, and we moved into a suburban house that actually had a lot of activity there. And it's one of those things that I didn't put two and two together until later in life, where I lived in the suburban neighborhood, and there was my backyard and a chain link fence. And on the other side of the chain link fence was an old Virginia farmhouse that a girlfriend of mine in elementary school lived in. So I lived in the backyard of this once prominent old Victorian farmhouse. And as an adult, I put two and two together and went, oh, I wonder if there was some runoff from that house into my house. Because there were lots of things that happened in that house. Like, I'd be in my bedroom, and I'm now 9 or 10 and 11 in that age group. And often, I had those kind of window coverings that you kind of pulled down, and then to have them go back up, you had to kind of yank them a little bit and then they would spin back up. So I had four of those on two different sets of windows on two different walls. And often I'd be in my bedroom and all four of them would pop at the same time and go flying up and, twirling around in their cases. I used to have nightmares in that room all the time. There was My brother lived in the basement. There were three bedrooms upstairs and two bedrooms downstairs and the laundry room downstairs. And my brother lived in the basement. And I would hear things downstairs because I'd get home from school before he would. We were kind of latchkey kids at the time. And so I would open the door to the basement and I would call down to him and I would hear somebody shushing me. And in talking to other podcasts that I told you about, I kind of put two and two together, which I thought that was interesting that I got shushed by the alien and then I got shushed by this whatever it was in our basement.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would yell down, "Hey, Chris, are you home?" And you'd hear the shushing sound. And then an hour later, my brother would get home from school. And that always, like, I never went downstairs by myself, especially once I started to get shushed. And I never obviously found out what that was about. There was a time where I was at the house alone and we had a babysitter, like a nanny at the time. And she was a live-in nanny and she had a much younger son. I was probably 11, 12, and her son was 7. And she had gone off to pick him up from school. And I was in the bath. And all of a sudden, the bath shared a wall with my father's bedroom wall. And his bedroom door started to open and slam on the wall in his room. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. And it kept slamming shut and then slamming open and hitting the wall and slamming shut. And it was just over and over again. And I was in the bath and I was paralyzed with fear. And so I actually, like, finally got up and put the clothes on my body without drying off. And I ran out of the house and I left the door open because I slammed the door shut because I remember feeling that would put a buffer between me and whatever was in the house. And I just ran up the street just by like a couple of houses and I kept looking back and I didn't see anything, but that feeling of pursuit. So I'm running up the street and I'm feeling like something's behind me. And then the nanny and her son crest the hill and she can see that I'm wet and wanting to know what's occurring. And I told her, there's somebody in the house. And when we turned around and just walked the, house and a half back to our house, the front door was wide open. So just like little stuff like that. It wasn't anything, where I was being, I don't know, consistent or I wasn't really seeing things. It was more audio. Me and my girlfriends which I don't recommend this, but we did a Ouija board at one of my slumber parties there. And we didn't know anything about the Ouija board or opening it up and starting the session or closing the session. And if I really think about it, it was during this time because I don't really remember the session with the Ouija board. I just remember it didn't go well and we all got freaked out and shoved it into my closet. And then I had like nightmares for weeks. And I finally asked my dad and I had to tell him what we had done. And he took the Ouija board out and he threw it away. And it ended whatever it was that was going on with me in the house, except for the shushing downstairs. But anyway, that was something there. But I weirdly, when I hit puberty, right, which is you hear all these stories of when girls become 13, 14, then that's usually when activity starts. My life went quiet. I stopped having paranormal experiences, but life itself got a little heavy at that time. But then I moved out to San Francisco when I was 18, and for like 3 years, then it was all fair game. And I actually lived in a haunted Victorian where I had several roommates. And I came to learn later in life, I went to the University of San Francisco. And if you do a little research on it, which I didn't do until my son actually said, well, what do you think it is about that land? And I found out that where the University of San Francisco is located is close to the Panhandle and Golden Gate Park of San Francisco. And back in the day when San Francisco was a brand new city, it used to be the cemeteries for the city. That whole plot of land, it was 5 cemeteries. And then San Francisco boomed in the late 1800s and they needed that land for living. So theoretically, they relocated the cemeteries to the first city south of San Francisco, which is called Colma. And then they built the University of San Francisco on top of these 5 cemeteries. So once I found out that, of course, I chose a college that was on 5 cemeteries, I just went, oh my gosh. And for somebody who's just open enough to these, to this side of life, living in San Francisco is a crazy town to live in because of all the Victorians. And I'll get to specific stories in a second, but I have a theory that I was hoping I could share with you as to why you always hear about like the Victorian farmhouses that are haunted, or you never hear about the mid-century modern condo in Miami that's haunted, right? And in one of my English classes, I learned that, when Darwin came around, he talked about that there's kind of no heaven, that there's it's evolution. And the Victorians were the first generation of people to die without knowing that heaven was a given, right? Every generation before then was, okay, we die and we go to heaven, and there's that. Now all of a sudden there are scientists talking about that we come from apes, and so when they died, I think they got scared and kind of locked and loaded on where they are at. And all of a sudden you've got San Francisco, that's like the most Victorian city in the world, and you go from house to house and there's always a ghost. I can guarantee you that there's always a ghost up in the attic of San Francisco Victorians. But to get to a specific story, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. But my first apartment that I lived in San Francisco was with 4 roommates, and we found a building that was Victorian era, but they're called flats, so it's not one big house. It's one long Victorian apartment on each floor, and this was a 3-story building. So we lived on the 3rd floor, and the way it worked was there were the 3 front doors are on street level. So the people who lived in apartment number 1 would just walk in their front door and they'd be in their house. And then the people who lived in apartment 2 would open their front door and they'd have a small staircase to get into the middle of the building. And then we lived on apartment number 3. So ours still floor level door, but you had to go all the way up to the top of the building on this one really long staircase that kind of had a little landing and looped around to a long hallway, and then all the rooms were off the hallway. And my bedroom was at the top of the stairs. So my bedroom door was the first door you'd hit when you got off the stairs. So I came home from school one day and I walked up to my bedroom, was tired. I laid down on the top of the bed and I wasn't asleep, but I heard the door open and shut. And then I heard somebody walk up the stairs. And I thought to myself, well, they should be coming around the corner any second. And they didn't. So I got up off my bed. I looked over the banister. Nobody was there. And then I got back on the bed. And then I heard it sound, it would kind of sound like somebody with heavy work boots or something. And then I heard somebody walking down the hallway into our kitchen. So I thought, oh, that's weird. And I kind of chalked it off to, maybe the neighbors downstairs came in their house and maybe the sound carried. So even though that's not what the hair on my arm said, that's how it felt. But then later that night, my male roommate got us all together and said, "Can we have a um like a roommate meeting?" So we all went into the living room and he said, "I'd like to propose the idea that this house is haunted because I'm having a lot of experiences." And he said that the night before he had been in the kitchen making a sandwich, and there was a one of those swinging doors between the kitchen and the dining room next door, and one of our roommates actually was using the dining room as a living or as her bedroom. Her name was Allison, and we felt good about it because the even though there was a door from the kitchen into her room, it had so many layers of paint on it that it was stuck in place. So she had privacy. It wasn't like we were in the kitchen, looking in her room. But he was in there making his sandwich, and the door, he said, opened all the way and slammed against the wall and then slammed shut back and stuck in its door frame. So I was like, crap, and I explained to them what I had encountered with hearing something walking. And the rest of the roommates had a little story here and there. So, like idiots, we decided to do the Ouija board, and immediately we had something communicating right away. And it moved the planchette a couple times on its own, which it's always a very disconcerting experience. And then we could tell right away that whatever was communicating with us was mischievous. It wasn't giving us straight answers, it wasn't giving us a safe feeling. So we stopped using it, but again, I actually didn't know until relatively recently about the concept of closing out a session with Ouija boards, but I haven't used them but the two times in my life. But it that opened up a whole can of worms in the apartment, and I think it would be too long of a time to tell you every little instance, but there was, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with singing in my bedroom. There was always a female in my bedroom, and she would sing to me from time to time. There was another time when we had there are all these guys. I woke up in the middle of the night, and there are all these guys that I could hear in the hallway that were talking, and it was bothersome. And I thought, who brought a bunch of guys home at night? And the next morning, all of us were a little disgruntled, and we were having breakfast and asking who brought the guys home. And we came to find out that nobody brought guys home, but we had all heard the same thing. But a lot of the experiences were coming from that room that was connected to the kitchen, Allison's room. And Allison started to have mental health issues. This was our first semester in college, and I'd come home from school. She was a painter, and she used that room as a painting studio as well. And she always kind of had a psychedelic style of painting, but this one, it started to get darker. Like her painting started to have, like, instead of girls with flowers in their hair, it was starting to get like haunted girls that were malnourished. And I'd come from home from school, and she'd just be sitting on the floor at the edge of her bed, and I'd say hi to her, and she wouldn't register me, and then she'd come out of the room like an hour later and not know that anybody was home. And finally she went home for Christmas break and decided to stay home, and her parents knew that they were putting us in the lurch, so they decided they were going to pay her rent until the end of the year just to keep promises. But that room went dark, so we didn't rent it to anybody else. We just kept the lights off, but you always had to pass by this room, and you could legit feel something in there lurking. It was a really uncomfortable feeling, and the energy in the home kept getting darker and darker. And so summertime came around, and we had a shift of roommates, and I was the only original roommate staying in the apartment. And the woman that was moving into that back bedroom, who's ironically, her name was also Allison, she had a friend who was Wiccan. and she asked the friend to come into the house to bless it and to bless her room in particular. So I didn't say anything because I was like, I want this to be a fresh start and not to, taint anybody with past experiences. And the friend of this new roommate came up to me and she's like, "Can we talk?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "So what's going on in that back bedroom?" And I went, "Oh crap, you know what's going on." She's like, "Yeah." She goes, "There's lots of stuff here." And then she goes, "In that door between the kitchen and the bedroom," she goes, "that's like a full-blown portal." She goes, "There's like 5 or 6 different levels in there, and you've got things passing through, and some of them are angry." And she was like, "What did you guys do in here?" So I tried to explain to her, our experiences, and she said she had enough to go on. So she went back and did like a ritual and saged it and closed it. And for like 2 months, the house went totally quiet. And we thought, oh, this is kind of fun. And then it burst wide open. That's when, that's when there was like singing in my room every night. There were people walking up and down the hallway. And it was September, and I was like, I need to get out of here. This is not a healthy experience anymore. So I ended up moving just 4 doors down into another building. And again, just to kind of give you the flavor of San Francisco, I'm moving into this apartment by myself, and I'm up again on the 3rd floor, and I'm in the back apartment. And as I'm opening my apartment door for the first time, I look out the window to the air shaft, and I look down, and at the bottom of the air shaft, somebody had painted a huge pentagram. And I just went, my God, in San Francisco, you can't escape any of that kind of energy. And then like 3 months later, some woman in the building next to mine fell asleep with a crack pipe lit, and then she took down all the apartment buildings, like the back apartments in the 3 buildings right there. So my
Oh,
apartment
geez.
burnt down. So, and I know that can be attributed to the lady who fell asleep and with the crack pipe lit. That was a very human experience, but I can't explain to you the feeling that is pervasive in San Francisco. You just walk down the streets, and like I said, I'm always feeling things. Very rarely do I hear or see things. So it's hard to get street cred when you're like, well, I have a feeling that there's somebody there, but I have enough experience in life where that's been validated to know that when I get that feeling, it's a real feeling. And you just walk around the streets of San Francisco, especially at night, and especially at dusk, and especially in October. You just see these Victorians after Victorian after Victorian, and it's always the attic because it's the quietest place for these things to kind of hide. And you just get this sense of loneliness and fear and ghostiness up in there. So that's kind of my San Francisco haunted Victorian story. And then I have I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of rambling. I've got a couple of other like really specific ghost stories, but I don't know if at this point I'm just sort of rambling on and on.
I don't
Should I
mind rambling.
continue?
I don't think you're rambling at all. No,
Okay.
whatever stories you want to share. I know that I
Okay,
want to
cool.
hear them and everybody wants to hear them. So it's up to you.
Okay, cool. Well, it's kind of fun being on this end of things because I'm so often listening to your podcast. It's kind of fun to be the one telling the story. So then I move in with my husband. I meet my husband, and I move south of San Francisco to the Mountain View area, which is a real pretty kind of old mining kind of area. And I had a funny little encounter with my husband's dead aunt. It was his mother's sister, and she was very close to my husband, was like a second mom, but she died like 2 months before I met my husband. So she was kind of this person that was of she was just somebody I'd heard a lot about, but I didn't have any experience with her. And my husband was 40 when I met him, and I was 28, and I was thinking my husband's family kind of had given up hope on him that he was ever going to find anybody and settle down. So when my husband's aunt passed away. It was somewhat unexpectedly. She had a lot of attention on him because she really wanted to see him settle down. She had 8 kids of her own, and then my husband had 2 older brothers that had wives and children, and so she really wanted that for my husband. So I move in with my husband into this very small apartment, 1 bedroom apartment, and I have 2 cats. I started to notice that my cats were getting with a little bit. And like I would see things like I'd come home from work. I was a school teacher at the time, and their bed would be like in the middle of the living room and they would be agitated. And so I was going, what's going on? Why are, at first I thought maybe the cats were somehow bringing it out, but these cats I'd had for a long time, and this was beyond their behavior, right? So I was kind of dealing with that, and I would just notice a generic agitation to the cats that hadn't been there, especially when my husband and I were both out of the apartment. So I may be living there 3 months, and my husband and I decided to go away for the weekend. And I'm a very clean person. So my cats had their food and water and their litter box in this huge, long, skinny closet that we had in the apartment. So what was typical of me at the time, when I don't have cats now, but I completely cleaned the closet, mopped it, washed out the litter box, brand new litter, brand new food, water bowls where everything was washed beautifully. Then the house was, vacuumed before we left and everything washed, because I like to come home to a clean environment. So we left on a Friday night and we came back on Sunday afternoon, and the cats were very agitated, and they're sleeping. Their little bed was flipped over upside down in the middle of their room. And then I noticed that the closet door where their food and water and everything was shut, where we kept it fully open. And so I peeked in the closet and saw none of their food had been eaten, none of the water, they hadn't gone to the bathroom in the litter box. So I was able to assess that the door had closed shortly after we left on Friday. So then I look around the apartment because I go, well, how did the cats use the bathroom? And this is when I just promote my cats for a moment because they're brilliant. They went into the bathtub to use the bathroom. They could have just pooped and peed right on the carpet. And I was so excited that the cleanup was easy enough, but it agitated me, it made me mad. Who's messing with my cat? So I actually went into the closet and I just said, okay, what is this? Who are you? Show yourself. I know you're here. You're trying to get my attention. You're messing with my cats. So show yourself. So the next morning, my husband goes to work. He used to go to work very early in the morning. So I got up at like 8 and I go into the closet to feed my cats. And there in the middle of the closet floor is a picture, right where I had stood the day before, is a picture of my husband's aunt. And I'd never seen the picture before, but she's kind of got her thumbs in her ears and her fingers splayed and her tongue sticking out at me like she's kind of going, neener, 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 that kind of a thing. And I took that as like a clear communication from her that she didn't like cats. She didn't know who I was. She was making sure her beloved nephew, was okay. And so I just kind of sat with the picture for a second and I said, okay, I get it. I see who you are. I get that you're hanging around and checking on your nephew. And so I interviewed with her. I just gave her my intent and what I was doing there, and that I really loved him, and that I saw that we were going to get married and have a future. And so it stopped immediately. Nothing more happened with my cats after that.
Did you ever ask well, now he's your husband, but at the time, did you ask him where the photo came from? I mean, was that something
Yeah, well,
that came up?
Yeah, well, I did ask him because I was like, Tom, look at this. This can't be any more obvious, you know. And he kind of laughed because I had said, is this was yesterday of an important day for her? Was there some sort of anniversary? And he's like, well, yesterday was Mother's Day, and she had, she was a mothering person. But I knew that there were, because it was a closet, it was like a storage closet. So in the shelves right there, there were family photos, there were family papers, that kind of stuff. But I am a big, my side job is I'm a photographer. That's how I kind of get my artistic self, fully realized. So I take family photos and stuff like that. So I'm like always the keeper of the photos. So I knew what photos were there and I had packed everything, in photo albums and stuff like that. And I had never seen that photo. So he had seen that photo, but he hadn't seen it in years.
That's interesting.
So yeah, so somehow it jimmied its way out of, the files of photos that we had up in that closet and made its way there. So that was that. And then I had another weird, very simple, and this is one of my more like, esoteric woo-woo experiences that was very real to me, and I even shared it with my husband. But I could see maybe one or two or three of your listeners kind of rolling their eyes because there's nothing concrete here. But the apartment we lived in was very close to three different hospitals. And one morning I woke up. My husband was a stock trader at the time, so he had to leave for work at like 4:30 in the morning. It was, real super early, and I didn't need to get up for work until 8 o'clock. So I'd see and be aware of him going, and it would bring me up from my deep sleep to a more shallow sleep. But this one morning, I had sleep paralysis, and this was my first experience with sleep paralysis, which I actually wanted to talk to you about sleep paralysis because I hear other people's stories with sleep paralysis and I experience sleep paralysis. But again, my experience with sleep paralysis is very different than what I hear other people say. But I'll tell that in a second. This one was my first experience where I was fully awake, but I was on my back, but I couldn't move my body. And I was awake enough that I could see the room, but I couldn't talk and I couldn't move. And I felt as if there were people surrounding the bed. I couldn't see anything, but they were all pushing on the bed at different times, like with their fingertips. So it was creating the mattress to sort of, go wonky, as like if you can picture a bunch of people sitting around. And it was disconcerting because I couldn't wake up. And then I looked over in the corner and I saw some really creepy, looked like some homeless guy. He was kind of dirty toothed and long, scraggly hair, and he had a overcoat on and it was really dirty. And he was just like crouching in the corner as this was occurring. And then that stopped and he kind of like scooted across the room and came right up to my face and just stared at me. And I couldn't talk. And I just sort of stared him down because I don't necessarily I do get frightened after the fact with this kind of stuff, but in the moment I can kind of keep my cool. And I couldn't talk to him, but I was able to communicate, with my mind that, that he was not welcome here and that this was nonsense and that, he needed to go get help or he needed to go, move on to his next existence. And then he was gone and I didn't have that experience again. But I was freaked out. Like when I came home from work, I was so freaked out by that, and my husband wasn't home yet, that I just like sat on the couch and just like I didn't even want to put my feet on the ground because I either that feeling of somebody under the couch or under the bed wanting to grab your ankles. So and I'm not normally like that, and but I was afraid that something was going to touch me or be there. So, and again, my husband came home. I told him what occurred, and he was like, okay, is there anything you want me to do? I was like, there really isn't anything for you to do. but at least, I did tell him about it, and he'll reference it. Like when we kind of get into a situation where maybe we're sharing scary stories, he'll be like, well, there was this one time when Jennifer was in the bedroom and she had this weird, creepy guy. But there wasn't anything much there. But again, if you'll indulge me on sleep paralysis, because like I said, the alien thing, I don't hear people mimic my experience, and my sleep paralysis experiences are not the same as what I hear from other people. So I'm kind of throwing this out there to see if maybe there are others out there that experience this like I do. So this happens to me maybe once or twice a year, where I will wake up and I know I'm in a sleep paralysis moment where my body's fully frozen and I'm fully awake. And my consciousness is there, and I do like a check. Like I know exactly where I'm at. I know which room I'm in. I know all of that. But my eyes are closed, but I can still see. And it's like I'm seeing outside of my body for the first time. And every time this happens to me, I always see the same room. It's just not my room. It's like a morphed version of my room. And I always think to myself, this is so interesting how different things look when you're not looking through your eyes. And that's the first thought I always have. And then I'm fully aware that I'm frozen. I'm fully aware that I'm looking outside of my body. And then I will retreat back into a dream. So, and I'm aware that it's a dream. I'm aware that I'm no longer actually like awake and conscious. And the dream is I'm usually in the bathroom trying to open the bathroom door, and there's a bodiless spirit on the other side of the door holding the door shut. And I'm afraid of the experience because I know that it's like I'm dealing with the paranormal, but at the same time I'm also aware of the fact that I always have the same experience, and that I'm also having a paranormal experience. And then I'll wake up. And I've been doing this for 20, 30. Well, it's actually since we've lived here in this house. So I would say I've been doing that for 21 years. So I don't know if
A
that means
couple times and a
anything.
couple times a year for that long.
A couple times a year. But it's always the same.
Mm-hmm.
I've come to full consciousness, like I'm fully conscious, but my body's frozen and my eyes are closed and I can still see, and I still see the same version of the room. It's just not it doesn't change every time. It's just not the version, it's just not my room. And I have the cognitive thought of how interesting this is, that things look so different when you're not looking at them through your body.
Right.
And then I retreat back into the dream of me being haunted in my bathroom.
So, and I'm not trying to be, and it's funny because you even said earlier, like, oh, not to reference a movie or this or that, but I'm the same way, so forgive me. But also,
I reference movies all the time.
I do too. So forgive this next statement, but I already know people out there are going to go, Shannon, why didn't you bring this up? Okay, so just indulge me for a moment now as well.
Okay.
So you had an experience where you saw an alien when you were fully awake, walking from, one part of this apartment complex to another through the woods, and even just take out it's shushing you and being tied to maybe the thing in the basement and all that. Take all that out. You
Okay.
said pretty much at the very beginning that you know for a fact that you have never been taken aboard a craft. But
Right.
how do you know that, especially considering what you just shared? Has that thought ever entered your mind that, well,
Well,
maybe this is some kind of a screen memory? I mean, and again, I'm going like way down deep into the, oh, of course Shannon's bringing this up, but I feel like I kind of have to because others are going to go, why didn't you ask that?
why didn't you ask that? Because it just doesn't seem real. Like I've thought to and I've said this now. I feel like I'm repeating myself. My alien encounter is low on the totem pole of interest to me. Right? I only did it. It only kind of came up as a topic of conversation. I'd only told my cousin who's as interested in the paranormal as I am, my son, who came up in topic when he was a younger teenager, and my husband, because we just, you talk about things with your husband from time to time.
But it doesn't
And
mean they're not interested in you.
then that's what I was going to say, is that the only reason I became interested in talking about it was because that one cry for, hey, does anybody have an alien story? And I was like, well,
Right.
actually, I kind of do. So, and then that's what sparked well, I wonder if anybody else has had this experience. So it wasn't anything like I've lived this life of feeling like aliens are paying attention to me. And that initial experience, like I felt, was accidental. But then there was that kind of follow up one here when we moved to Florida. And so I don't know. I've researched enough to know that it usually people who are tagged are people who are tagged, right? So, and the fact that I've had more than one experience, even though it was really only one prominent one, it could be. But I don't have weird markings on my body. I don't ever have lost time. I don't ever feel that. Though, like I said, I do look out, I do feel compelled from time to time to look out my back door into my very dark water retention area in the back of my townhouse to see, if there's anything out there. But I don't, I just don't feel, I feel, as silly as this sounds, I feel like it would be stolen valor if I were to say, oh, I'm an abductee, because that's just not real to me in any way, shape, or form. I'm haunted.
You brought because
But
you brought up essentially being surrounded by several somethings and them all pushing down on your bed at the same time. So,
ooh,
who's
you just gave me you just gave me chills, Shannon. What are you doing today?
sorry.
I never even I never even put I never put two and two together, but I swear to you, I am in a full blown body sweat, and I think every hair on my body is standing straight up. So
Sorry.
thank you for that experience. I'm never
And
gonna
I'm
sleep
not,
again.
yeah, I'm not trying to like go, oh, I know this is what's happening. You came to me for answers. I don't have the answers. I'm just trying to
Right.
step back and go, okay, well, hold on, because you said this. And it
You
does
said
tie
this.
into other experiences. People have literally said, no, I know I was on a craft and I was on a table and I was surrounded by a few of these a-holes and
People,
they were
right.
doing this to me or that to me. And that is to say also that, again, to be a parrot and say, I'm very happy that your face to face alien encounter was positive. But that doesn't mean, and I've heard that before, we've all heard that before, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't lying to you or it wasn't making you feel that way on purpose.
Purposely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Or
and I'm
changing the
not, and
memory or
I,
something.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
could be way off on that. This is all just postulation. But some of these things that you're saying, I'm going, well, yeah, you don't have marks and you don't think you have missing time, but that doesn't always mean that it didn't happen.
And I know enough about this stuff to know, and I know enough about my crazy life to know that anything's possible. So I'm not going to say no, but it's just absolutely not real to me. I have no recall and no memory of an abduction.
Well, and that's good. I would say that's good. In
So,
almost every case, I would say that I would want to be that person that doesn't remember. Here's another question for you. And this is, you said the word woo earlier, which I love because sometimes I always like to bring up woo stuff too. Why not? Okay, here we go. Ready for some woo? Have you ever
I love
gone,
woo.
have you ever gone outside and in your mind or out loud gone, I'd really like to see you guys like come in and with your craft and, essentially like a CE5 protocol. Have you ever
Yes.
done? Okay.
Well, yes, no, yes, no. So back in during the pandemic, my husband all of a sudden decided to go down some rabbit holes and get a little conspiracy theory on me, and all of a sudden he's talking my language, like he's wanting to talk about aliens and stuff. And I was like, who is this man that I've married? This is kind of exciting. So we started to watch, is his name Richard Greer? I don't, he's
Stephen
the
Greer.
CE5, Stephen Greer, thank you. He is the CE5 guy. So we got like, to be honest, and I'm sorry if he's listening or any of his fans are listening, we got about 3/4 into his one thing, and we both like found ourselves asleep on the couch. So it didn't hold my interest long enough. But I did do some research to see if there were some CE5 groups around here because I thought, oh, that, I'm game for that kind of stuff. I kind of find it interesting. So I joined like a CE5 group on Facebook, but it never went anywhere. And I don't feel that I hate to say it, but I don't feel that connected to the guys who were interested in alien stuff. So I just never went too much with it. But then I like, as I've said now a bazillion times, I love ghost stuff, and my favorite ghost place to go is like the ghost hunters guys, and then they have the spin-off show with the Amy and Adam, the kindred spirits. And I like that show because I really feel that they understand that the show, they don't always have to have something extreme there. They're not like faking it just to get the ratings, and they treat the spirits that they talk to with respect, like that they're real people, and that means something to me. So it just so happens that I live on the Gulf Coast of Florida, but they used to go to St. Augustine and you could go ghost hunting with Amy and Adam. So me and a girlfriend went, I want to say 3 years ago. I spent a weekend in St. Augustine, and we got to do a lot of the St. Augustine, the old jailhouse and the lighthouse, and we had to do it with these people from the show. And that was just for my ghosty, spooky self. That was very exciting. But then, and I'll be nice here, but the woman who was part of the Conjuring house, the Andrea Perrin, was there as well. It was sort of like ghost hunting with all of these paranormal people. And so they kind of did a round robin thing. And when you were done ghost hunting in the lighthouse, then you went outside the lighthouse and you laid down on the ground with Andrea Perrin, who she doesn't promote this that much, but she's more into alien stories than she is into ghost stories. And so she had us lay down and look up into the sky and send, kind of communication out to them, and, that kind of a thing. And then I found myself looking up and thinking that I saw things, the flight patterns that weren't just planes and stuff. But then she had like her dad there, and they were like, "Oh, it's the mothership," and look at that. We haven't seen the mothership in a long time, and I'm really into this stuff until I'm not, and I'll hit a real practical wall, and I'll go, "Okay, that's too crazy even for me." You know what I mean? So when they start talking about like the mothership and it's just a dot in the sky, so that's the closest I've come to that. But like I said, the alien stuff doesn't interest me as much, and I don't feel that connection to the community. I'll talk to people who have, hauntings, and I feel like I'm totally at home. I talk to people who've had an alien experience, and I'm one of the ones who has one of the more concrete extreme ones, like where I actually saw one, right? And I don't feel as connected to it. So I think that was a very long way of explaining to you that no, I don't know if I'm been abducted or not, but it wouldn't surprise me only from knowing the pattern.
Right. No. It's all just postulation and trying to see what might fit, but even so, we'll never know for sure. So I think it's a good thing if you don't remember certain things, because I've had plenty of people on that have, and some of them are all light and love about it, and God bless them, and others go, they violated me in every single way, shape, or form. I can't sleep. I need therapy. I need medication. And who could blame them? I mean, really?
Well, I do know that I am an emotional eater, and I eat a lot of pizza, and my life is fairly calm now. So who's to say that maybe I could blame my weight on alien abductions and then be done with it? And I say I don't mean to make light of it. it's like I said, it's
Yeah.
just not real.
I understand. I understand that. Trust me. Well, yeah. What next, Jennifer? Where do you want to go next?
Well, the one I do have kind of a fun, like it's like the quintessential haunting spooky story, which is fun to tell. And just as a little side vignette, my son switched high schools last year. So I have this new group of friends, mom friends, that I haven't had before. And so I decided this year I wanted to do a little Halloween get together. So Saturday night before Halloween, I had my friends and their husbands over, and we just had like a little party. And it was, to tell ghost stories. And everybody beforehand had said, well, I want to come and I want to come to the party, but I don't have any ghost stories. And I've come to learn that everybody says that. And then when you poke and prod at them a little bit, all the time, they'll go, well, there was this one time. So anyway, so this is sort of like when I'm camping with the Boy Scouts. This is my quintessential ghost story. So I was 29. My son hadn't been born yet. I was still living in California, and I got notification that my mom was passing away. And so within 24 hours, my husband and I packed up, got on a plane, flew out to Virginia, which is where I was I was born and raised. And I ended up staying in the same hotel room, or the same hotel as my brother. And my brother he's an artist in the sense he's like a musician, and he's a foodie and that kind of stuff, but he doesn't live in the woo-woo land, right? I've never, even though he and I grew up in the same houses, he and I never talked about ghosts or anything like that together. So I've always thought that it was a singular experience for me, that I was the one who was more open to it than he was. So we get to the hotel. It's like a Radisson built in 1979. There's no historic value to this thing at all, right? It's just this modern monstrosity. And my brother and I decide that it's pretty obvious that my mom's getting ready to pass. And so she's in a coma. So we thought we needed, he and I, to sit and just legitimately talk about the logistics of death. Like, what are we going to do for her funeral and all, that kind of a thing. So we got our families situated in their respective hotel rooms. And this comes to play in the story in a minute, but I'm big on washing my face and brushing my teeth before I go to bed. So I did that before meeting up with my brother, so that when we were done talking, I could just go to bed and not have to do my nighttime routine. And then the hotel was very gracious, and they gave us one of their small conference rooms to talk and, to sit, and they said you could have it as long as you want. So my brother and I ended up talking until 2:30 in the morning and getting things kind of figured out and squared away. So we go up to our rooms together because they're side by side. We say our goodnights, and from the time I get into my hotel room and I'm in bed with my husband is maybe 2 minutes. I'm exhausted. I've already brushed my teeth, and I just put on my nightgown and I'm in bed. And just as my head hits the pillow, I hear like a light tapping on the door. So my immediate thought is, oh, my brother we just left each other, and maybe he has thought of something he needed to follow, that he forgot to tell me. And this is right before cell phones came out. I feel ancient even saying that, but so he couldn't text me or anything like that. So I go to get out of bed, and every bone in my body says, don't do it. Stay in bed, right? So I kind of crouch down. My husband's body is between me and the front door, and I kind of crouch back down, and then the door handle starts to move, like somebody's testing it. And I'm just like, oh Lord, I don't, I'm just getting the bad waves and bad vibes. So I just sort of snuggled up against my husband, and in case it was my brother, I could use the late hour and that I was already asleep as an excuse not to, when I talked to him in the morning, that's why I didn't answer the door. So fast forward to the next morning, and keeping in mind, again, I've never talked to my brother about any of my ghost experiences. we go over to their room to get them for breakfast. And my brother's looking at me and he's like all wild eyed Willie. And he's, Jen, you won't believe what happened to me last night after we parted. So this is my brother's story after we parted the night before. So much like me, he takes him but a few minutes to get into bed with his wife. And he's, it's one of those traditional hotel rooms that have the two queen beds. So he and his wife are in one bed, and his daughter and his son, they're like 7 and 9, are in the other bed. So it's like 5 minutes from him entering the room to being in bed with his wife. And he starts to hear a little knock on the door. And his same thought was that maybe, I had forgotten to tell him something and maybe he needed to get up. And then he started to hear the door handle, like somebody trying to jimmy it. So his alarms went off a little bit. So he goes to get up off the bed, out of bed, and he turns so that he's looking at the head of the bed or the foot of the bed. And his daughter is standing at the foot of the bed, but it's dark, so it's more of like her shadow, but she's standing at the foot of the bed. He can see her long hair and her nightgown. And he's like, Jessica, what's going on? And she doesn't answer. And he's thinking maybe she's sleepwalking or not. So he turns to his left to turn on the lamp in between the two beds. And as he turns the lamp on, the first face he sees in the bed next to him is his daughter, Jessica, who's fast asleep. And so then he looks back at the foot of the bed and he sees that there's nobody, there's no little girl there. And it freaked him out so bad. He's not used to that kind of stuff. So he really freaked. And it was kind of validating for me that my experience had been the same because I had told my husband about it, but it was also the fact that he finally, like, I found out that I wasn't the only one in our family that, did have those experiences. So that's my quintessential haunted hotel story.
Now, because early on you said that your brother really didn't have a whole lot of experiences. So was that kind of his one and only, essentially? Because did he ever hear anything in the basement with the shusher?
To be honest with you, I don't know. My brother is an asshat. He and I don't get along. He just never truly forgave me for being born. And I know that sounds, I'm 52 years old. So I know that sounds like, so idiotic. But he and I are estranged right now. And it's just a topic we never talked about, ever.
I'm
This
sorry
is the
to hear
one
that.
and only time that we ever discussed anything paranormal. A lot of it too is, he was older than me, and he was more, my mom, especially in the 70s, was not mentally well. And on top of that, you add like drugs and alcohol.
Right.
And so he kind of had that mother son bond and this innate desire to protect her. So I think where he probably saw things from my mom that were not quite right, and he went into like protector bear mode,
Right.
where I saw the paranormal side to it. So in my mind, I've always thought that if he maybe understood the paranormal side to it, that it would make more sense to him. But we just never talked about it. It was just not something that was in our realm of discussion. It kind of, again, like the alien thing where I see a freaking alien and then don't mention it for 20 years. You know what I mean? It was just something you didn't talk about, or, it was such an everyday part of my life to a certain extent that I didn't think of it as something maybe somebody else wasn't experiencing. So I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, the rest of my stories, they're not as pronounced in that regard. Like I said, we don't manage the building anymore, but we used to manage a old building in downtown Clearwater, Florida, which is kind of the area that I'm in. And it had 12 units in there, and each of those units was haunted. And I knew I got validation on that because every time I'd walk from the downstairs to the upstairs, there was somebody would always run up behind me and get real close to my back, and it was a really antagonistic, uncomfortable feeling. And then I moved these guys that from an apartment downstairs to the second floor. And when I was doing their lease signing, the one guy was like, "You know this place is haunted, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you ever get that guy who runs up on you on the staircase?" I was like, "All the time." And so we kind of laughed about it. So I have like a million and one of those stories. The only other thing that's kind of interesting, and I don't know, and I can kind of, my son is currently 17 and getting ready to go off to college, and he's become a very straight-laced military guy. So he doesn't live in the land of the woo-woo anymore, but he certainly did when he was little, and he knows that he did. He knows he has this ability. Like my mom had it, I had it stronger than her, but my son was like crazy the first 6, 7, 8 years that we had him around. Both my husband, even my husband was like, damn it. I was hoping that he wouldn't be this way because it's easier as a young child to not be this way, to not be the creepy kid who sees things and talks to people. But I've got some like 3 or 4 stories about him that I think you'd be interested in if you've got the time.
Absolutely.
So it was started kind of funny with my son when I was pregnant with him. Everybody was sure I was going to have a girl, and we had a name for her, and we were starting to do the nursery. And I go into, at the time, I had an office outside of my house. I currently work from within my house now. And my best friend at the time was the receptionist at the office building. So I stood and I talked to her every morning. I would come and bring her coffee, that kind of a thing. And my son's name was going to be Lily if he had been a girl. So this one morning, she goes, "How's Lily doing?" And at the time, I was maybe 20 weeks pregnant. And I heard so clearly from inside of me, which it ended up when he was 5, 6, or 7, he started to develop the same kind of attitude. He was a very pleasant little boy, and then he started to get, a little attitudinal. But from deep within inside of me, I heard this, "I am not a girl." And I just looked at my friend Susan. I went, "Jesus, Susan," because she's very open to these kinds of experience. And I said, "This is what just happened to me." And she's like, "That's amazing. But, you're on crack that you're definitely having a girl." And I was like, "I really don't think I'm having a girl." And I went home and I told my husband, and he was like, "No, we're definitely having a girl." I was like, "I really am telling you right now that we're not having a girl." And within the week, we had the sonogram to tell us the sex of the baby, and it was a boy. And I just looked at my husband, and he was like, "Oh my God, you were right." So then that was the first time that I felt, my son really made himself known. So he's born, and most new parents are obsessed with their children, and oh, aren't they so observant? Aren't they so smart? That kind of stuff. But I did start to notice that he was particularly good baby. He was bright-eyed, very aware of his environment, and very easy to just kind of communicate with. I always knew what he wanted and needed and that kind of a thing. And when he started to talk, around 18 months to 2 years old, he would say things like "my other mom," or "the house that my other house," or that kind of stuff. Where I used to be up in the clouds, and I just wrote down. I was aware enough to not feed him the information to be like, "Tell me more." Just whenever he would say something, I kind of kept a journal of the things that he would say, just in case it needed to be known later in life. But when he was 3, we were getting ready to just go to the Barnes and Noble story time. And again, I cannot reiterate the fact that we live in suburbia, Boy Scouts, all that kind of stuff. Story time at Barnes and Noble, at the library, that's the life, that I raised him with. I wasn't one who was, having him watch scary stories, or, I really wanted him to not have kind of like that upbringing that I did. But he, as we were making a turn, we witnessed this really bad car accident on the other side of the street. And just a little side story, as my son was learning to talk, there were certain things he wanted you to know about him, and it was his little toddler speech. So he loved a certain vintage of car. I don't know cars well enough, but it would be something like a Camaro or something like that. But he'd get excited when he'd see a certain vintage of car, and he always talked about this yellow car that he had, and he wanted you to know that his favorite color was yellow, and he wanted you to know that he loved firemen. So we had like a fireman themed bedroom for him, and he wanted you to know that he once had two friends, and we just went, okay, we thinking he had imaginary friends or whatnot. So, but these were the things that just in talking to this little toddler, you would glean this information from him throughout, communications with him. So we're on our way to this Barnes and Noble story time. We witness this really bad car accident. I'm going to turn around and help, but as I'm getting ready to make the U-turn, I see lots of people coming to help. So I'm just going to go on my way and get my son to story time and just continue on our day. So, but my son is aware. He's aware that something has occurred. He's aware that I was going to stop and help. So I just explained that, there were two cars that hit each other and the people needed help. So he goes, well, Mom, I have a story to tell you. And I said, okay. And he goes, well, that's how I came into this family. And I'm fleshing out the story. Obviously, my 3-year-old isn't talking this way, but this is pretty close to what he said. And he goes to tell me the story that before I was his mom, he was a teenage boy, and he had a yellow car, and he had two best friends that he used to take home from school every day, and they had the best of time, and they used to just have the best. They were the best of friends. And one day his another car hit his car, and his two friends were able to get out of the car, but he was not able to get out of the car, and he died. But he had been very aware of the firemen that had come onto the scene and had tried to get him out of the car, and they couldn't. And he was he passionately implored me, can you help me find this fireman, because I would like to thank him for trying. And I'm just driving this 3-year-old to Barnes and Noble going, oh my God, this is a pretty poignant story that, that he's telling me. And it makes sense. It brings all the stuff that, once could communicate, he started to communicate now, now I'm like piecing this story together. And so, when we got to Barnes and Noble, I'm really big into acknowledgement. I think that things should be acknowledged. So I turned around and I just kind of grabbed his hand and I said, I heard the story. I understand the story that you told me. And I said, if that is how you came to be in our family, I just want you to know you landed in the right place, because I really love you and I really love being your mom, and I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to keep you safe. And that was it. He just got out of Barnes and Noble, went, got his cookie, went and sat down with his friends, and he never mentioned it again. But all of a sudden, he had no more interest in his fireman. He never talked about the yellow car. He never talked about his two friends. It was like, that moment was kind of over, and the end of that particular story of his life. But then there was like there's this community college near our house that we drive by, but it doesn't have signs on it or anything. It's just random like business buildings. And it was a Sunday afternoon in the summer, so there weren't students, and he was only, again, maybe 2.5, 3, and he wouldn't have known about, students with backpacks and stuff like that. But there wasn't any of that visual stimulation there. But we just drove by this community college on our way home, and he sat up and he looked and he went, My brother used to go to school there, and he doesn't have a brother. He's an only child. And then he just kind of sat back down, and my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, oh my God. So, just lots of stories like that. When we went back, my husband grew up in first part of his life in Illinois. And, I've told you how straight laced my husband is. So, what I'm about to tell you is going to actually sound like he's woo woo, but it'll explain in a minute. Where there's this famous cemetery in the town that he grew up in Illinois, and it's famous for its beauty. So people will go there because it's like a park-like environment, not because it's a cemetery. So the first time that we went to visit this area of Illinois, my son again was 3 or 4, and we had him in a car seat in the back seat, and the car seat was still geared towards the littler kids. So they're not sitting bolt upright, they're sitting kind of reclined. And so he's looking at like the top of the car and out the top of the windows. He's not looking out the windows down on the ground, seeing the headstones or anything. And there weren't that many headstones. And I don't know if at 3 if he would have known what headstones were. But my husband's driving us through the cemetery to just show us how beautiful this piece of land is. And my son goes, Mom, I want to go home. There's too many people up in the trees and they're scaring me. And I'm like, this kid has no idea that we're driving through a cemetery. But there were clearly like people to him up in the trees, and they were really scaring him and making him feel like he wanted to go home.
Yeah, that's
And
creepy.
then it was really creepy. And I'm not going to lie, the part of me that likes the scary stories and I watch the paranormal shows, I'm like, that's freaking cool. You just said that. But it was at the time, you just kind of looked at my husband and he was like, oh my gosh. And then the last story, well, one little story with my son was that he was now older, maybe 8 years old, and he used to play out in our backyard area. We have this huge oak tree out there, and he'd kind of make like a little fort back there and everything. And we were seeing him getting agitated because we're sitting in our living room and it was overlooking the backyard, and you could see him talking to somebody and or something up at the top of the tree, and he was getting agitated, and he just kind of came in his little fury of 8 years old. And we said, are you done playing outside? And he goes, yeah, I'm never going out there again. We said, what's going on? And he goes, well, the boy in the tree keeps throwing acorns at me. And he never went back out there. He never felt comfortable out there again. And then the last story with him was I told you we purchased this home up in North Carolina, but we used to go visit there. It's up in the mountains and it's really beautiful, and it's a beautiful old town. And we used to go visit there every summer before we purchased a place up there. And this again, he's probably 8 or 9, probably 9. And I'd never talked to my son about these experiences. He would say something, I would acknowledge them up again. And I definitely didn't let him know that I had my own activity. There was this restaurant that was recommended to us in this town that we visit in North Carolina all the time. And it's in an old house, but it's like a brunch place. It's like a ladies eating quiche and salad and drinking their mimosas. It's not like some haunted house experience, but it's an older house, right? So it's hard to get my husband to go to like a quiche and mimosa kind of place, right? So to get him to agree to take me to this old house so I could have my mimosa was like a big deal for me. And so the three of us went, and we, of course, were seated in the attic. So I'm just trying to have a vacation, and my son is usually very chill. He's excellent to travel with, always has been, even to this day. Like I said, he's almost 18, and he's just a real fun, chill guy to be around. And we never had to deal with him being an antsy kid or a upset kid or a demanding kid, right? So we take him everywhere we go, and it's been a real comfortable experience. But we're in this attic of this cute little house, and I'm looking at what mimosa do I want and what piece of case do I want. And I'm excited, but my husband's just in his little grumpy mode of I want to just eat and go, right? And my son's getting agitated. I don't want to be here. I want to go. And he's never been that way. It's always like wherever the food is, he's happy to be at. And it's got French toast. It's his favorite thing in the whole wide world. So I'm sitting going, why is he being picky in this place of all places, right? Why now? So as the temperature of the room, like the people are getting louder, and my husband's getting grumpier, and my son's getting more agitated, and I'm sitting there going, what the hell? This is just should be an easy situation. Again, I can't see it, but I'm fully can see it in my mind that there is a woman in a corner who is she is the head maid of this house, and she's trying to prepare this house for a party. So she's going back and forth between the door to the stairs to the door to the little attic, like the storage part of the attic. And she's trying to get things out of there to prepare. And she doesn't understand why all these people are in this room. And she's getting very agitated because she can't get her job done. So now I'm tapped into her while my son's getting agitated, my husband's getting grumpier, and we get our food and we're eating in anger, and the situation's just not getting any better. And my son's just being kind of a little jerk, and my husband's not handling it well. And I'm overstimulated at this point. We finally, like, fine, we'll pay. And we all three go stomping out of the restaurant, and we go walking up the street, and I'm walking ahead of everybody, and I'm now really super grumpy. And all of a sudden the tension breaks and it's over. We're back to normal. So I turn around and I look at my son and I go, "What just happened?" And he goes, "I don't know, Mom, but the lady was bothering me. She was scaring me." And I said, "Are you talking about the lady who was putting stuff in that cubby hole and she had the cloth on her head?" And he was like, "Yes." I said, "I saw her too." And he looked at me and this relief flooded over him. He was like, "You did?" He's like, "You see those things too?" And I said, "Yeah, I see them in my mind. I don't see them with my eyes, but I saw her too, and she was making me feel very uncomfortable too." And then he like started to cry and he hugged me and I hugged him and I said, "I'm sorry I lost my cool and I didn't help you through that. I didn't quite know that you were aware of her either and that you were scared. So we kind of made a pact that, if something like that happened again, that he would communicate and I would be more of like, I'll see you through this kind of mom as opposed to allowing myself to get agitated."
Wow.
So, but that was the first time that he and I came together on that. And then my last story with him was shortly thereafter, probably within the year. To He passed away in Arizona. He lived in Florida, but he was in Arizona for my niece's graduation. His wife, who was a little wackadoo, was left in Cocoa Beach by herself. So my husband, my son, and I went to Cocoa Beach to help my stepmother, while my brother was in Arizona handling the death of my father. And I was having to deal with my own sadness, but I also was, cognizantly aware that my son was having, this was his first death, and he and my dad, they must have traveled through time and space together. There was like a huge connection between the two of them. And so I knew this was more than just like your regular loss with my son. And so we get there late, like on, I guess it was like a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, or something like that. We check in on my stepmother. She's okay. So we say we're going to get her the next morning. We go get her, and then we start doing again the logistics of death. We have to go pick up his car from the airport. We have to go get some, other stuff. And we're finally coming back to his condo. And one of the things that I always felt a little bit bad about my dad is that my dad was one of those, one and done. When you die, you're dead. There's no afterlife. There's no soul. There's no spirit. So I was always kind of cognizantly aware that if and when he passed, his passing was probably going to be a little upsetting for him because he was going to probably be very confused. So it was just sort of something that my husband and I had talked about and all that kind of stuff. So here we were, he's passed. He's passed in another state. He passed in his sleep, all this kind of stuff. So tradition that my father and son had was, if my son was approaching my dad from a long hallway or from across the room, my dad would kind of bend down and slap his hands together and hold him out in a hug. And then my son would go running, from across the room to jump into his arms. So we get out of the not the elevator of his condo. We turn the corner, and my dad's condo is maybe 10 doors down this very long hallway. And again, I don't see it, but it almost is like, when a street gets really hot, you see the heat waves.
Mm-hmm.
So in front of my dad's condo door, I see heat waves, and I'm very aware that my dad is there and very relieved to see us, because this is probably the most normal thing he has seen since his passing. And he's like, I can almost glean from him that it is like, he was like, oh, maybe everything's going to be okay. Maybe I've just been, having a weird dream or something. So I can see in my mind's eye that he bends down and he kind of slaps his hands and he holds them out for my son to go running to him, and my son doesn't go running to him. So I can see that my dad's now starting to panic a little bit, because that's not something that my son would do. So he tries again, and my son doesn't go running to him. And I'm fully just standing there, we're walking towards this, but I'm fully aware of it. And my son used to call my dad Momo. So my son's holding my hand and he squeezes and he goes, Mom, Momo's at the front door and he wants me to run to him, but I don't feel comfortable doing that. And I said, I know, Nolan, and don't just stay here with me. And he was like, okay. And then I looked up, and then the heat wave kind of exploded and dissipated, and he was gone. And then we just went about our day. So
wow,
that's my son. But he said that he was open to all this kind of stuff, and he had a friend, imaginary friend that he would talk to and walk around holding hands with. And he used to say that my dad used to hang out in his room a lot. And then I started to notice around 12 or 13, he stopped talking about that kind of stuff. And he and I we're open communicators. So I just said, Nolan, do you not have these experiences anymore? And he told me that he consciously made the decision to close himself off to that side of himself, because he didn't feel like that was innately him, and like I said, now he's turned into this, I followed the Grateful Dead when I was in high school, and I went out to San Francisco for college, and he's now, going to a military college, and he's 6'3" and like a Mr. Military Man. So he realized that he wasn't that, esoteric, open,
mm-hmm.
Spiritual guy. He was more this, this logical guy, and he knows that he has this side to him. He's just not interested. So he purposefully closed himself off to it.
Well, that makes sense. I think a lot of people choose to do that, and that's okay,
Yeah, and as long as you make that decision yourself, that is what it is.
All right, so before I let you go, can we go through a quick bullet point list of questions that I have about the Hammerhead being, because I think it's important to get as much information out there about that guy as we can.
Sure.
All right. So it's 6 or 7 feet tall. We already said the eyes were at the ends of these extended fleshy points of his head, right? So
Right.
just like a hammerhead. What color?
Just like a hammerhead.
What color was the skin?
It was gray. So like the body from what I've in the movies and stuff like that,
Yeah.
that gray color with the long fingers. And if I had to guess, I think he only had, not guess, but if memory serves me well, there were only 4 fingers as opposed to 5, but they were the elongated with the bulbs, kind of
Right.
a little bulbous at the end. Everything about him was stretched and long, but he was definitely gray.
So
And there
so
or anything.
long arms, long legs, right?
Yeah.
How about a mouth or a nose?
I feel like I want to
I mean, if you don't
say
remember, that's
yes.
fine. You just say I don't
Yeah.
recall.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I don't remember. I feel like I can picture that there were like little nose holes and a little slit for the mouth, but it could be very easily that I'm just sticking them in there.
How about feet?
Yes, but I wasn't looking down enough to really clock that. I was really like looking at his
Oh, I
face.
understand that. Trust me.
Yeah.
That's not a shocker, believe me. Okay,
Yeah.
was it skinny or bony or
Yes.
Okay.
Very skinny and stretched out. Very skinny.
Okay. All right. That's what I had. That was the questions that I had about our little hammerhead friend. And see, I do the same thing. If it's like a little alien, I'm always like calling it he or little dude or we don't know what it is.
Yeah,
but
well, I don't know,
I have the same thing.
if I had to say that this thing was male, somehow it was communicated to me.
Yeah.
And I know, and whatever, but it had male vibes. It was, yeah, I felt like I was in the presence of a man.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on, Jennifer, to share. I do hope that people get in touch if they've, and I'm again, I'm not imploring you have to have this yourself. If you've just come across something similar on another show, in a blog, in a whatever, I don't care. Just send it along. That's the whole point of sharing, is just trying to compare the data points. But Jennifer, I thank you so much for coming on.
Well, it's been nice. It's nice to have a platform where you can talk about these things and not have people, treat you with anything but respect. It's nice to be able to sort of exercise these moments. And, so I appreciate that you provide a platform for that.
If you're new here, I hope you're enjoying it enough to head to your podcatcher of choice to rate and review the show. This helps it aggregate across the listening platforms, which will turn into more people willing to come on and share their encounters. If you've been listening for years, I'd ask that you please do the same. Home base for Into the Fray is intothefrayradio.com. There you will find all episodes, blog posts, and get bonus content info. Speaking of that bonus content, on top of the free weekly show, I also produce bonus content for Patreon and Apple Podcasts Premium. On either platform, you get all bonus audio episodes and early releases, each one ad-free, of course. Full disclosure, though, Patreon has a bit more in the way of perks because of their interface. Over there, you will get video versions of patron-only chats, the private Discord channel, and merch at certain pledge levels. So head to patreon.com/intothefray or your Apple Podcatcher app to sign up for bonus content today. You can find me on the big 3 social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Linktree link in each of my bios will take you to all the places you want to venture regarding ITF, including Small Town Monsters documentaries, various ways to listen to the show, Beyond the Fray books, contact info for me, and more. And lastly, and really honestly, most importantly, if you'd like to share your encounter or encounters on Into the Fray, the best way to get in touch is by emailing me at shannon@intothefrayradio.com.